The day after the 2020 presidential election, when Florida Governor Ron DeSantis bragged about his state's election procedures, saying, quote, "That's how elections should be run." Well, a lot of water under the bridge since then, and these days DeSantis and company are doing everything from remaking the rules of mail-in voting to creating a special police force devoted to investigating reports of election fraud. And his administration is fighting a court battle to save and a redraw congressional map that gives the GOP an advantage. But outside the state capitol yesterday, a group of state legislators and a few hundred supporters showed up to protest and say no more.
Right now, behind us, within this building, they think black folk are their political doormat. What you say? And they've made us their political red meat. But I promise you, we see you because we've been here before. Senate Bill 254, my colleagues know it's not needed. They know what they're doing because they believe that if they can silence our voice and if they can restrict our votes, that we lose. But I promise you, we see you because we've been here before. And every time when we show up, we win.
Well, with all the different election issues making news in the Sunshine State right now, there's a lot to unpack. So joining me now is Jasmine Burney-Clark, founder of Equal Ground Education Fund and Action Fund. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First, I want to start off with your reaction to what we're seeing play out in Florida and other states, for that matter, as houses across the country.
What we're seeing here in the state of Florida and in houses across the country is that we can't wait one more day in order for people to have the full accessibility to be able to participate in the elections process. The attacks that we are seeing from our governor at the ballot box, the process of drawing our lines in the state of Florida, as well as other issues like teaching our students in our classrooms, teacher shortages. There are so many different issues happening in the state that we just can't wait. And we are also suffering at the hands of a governor who has a clear agenda, one that only sets himself apart. He is even using this time to undermine his own party's leadership in the legislative session. And so there is so much at risk right now. And so many things up ahead in our legislature and that will be on our ballot this year that we have to take seriously.
But sadly, so many people don't realize the impact of our voting rights and what's actually going on behind doors in some of these courthouses and state buildings. But your organization launched an initiative to educate voters about it. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so last year we launched it in Juneteenth 2021, a voting rights tour, when we learned that SB 90 or Senate Bill 90 was going to take away our ability to hand people food and water at the polling places. It was going to take away our ability to use drop boxes at Souls to the Polls events. It took away our ability to help some of our elderly and language needs accessibility folks read their ballots when they made it to the polling place. We had to make sure that people knew what the changes were. In addition to that, they needed to know that there are now new ID requirements when they request a vote by mail ballot, and that the frequency of vote by mail ballot increased. So we, instead of hosting events, went out to every food drive that you could find, vaccination site, COVID testing location, a festival and concert you can think of, handing out materials so that people who were participating in the municipal elections would be prepared for their election process, but then those who are now going to participate in the midterm this year, giving them a head start to start gathering the necessary documents they need and obtaining the required identification in order to participate in the process. So this educational journey has not ended. We are continuing and are going to actually double our efforts this year as we head into the midterm.
Well, a lot of people may be wondering, can you sort of out-organize these concerted efforts to undermine democracy?
Yes, so, we are seeing from our state particularly, we're in the middle of a redistricting process. And so if your first entry into the civic engagement process is to register to vote, how do we first block you from being able to do such a thing? If you're already registered and on the ballot, Are you engaging in the elections process, or are you an infrequent voter who needs to be purged out of the process? If you are a frequent voter, how do we make it more difficult for the way that you've traditionally been voting to increase the complication that you need in order to get to the ballot box? And then how do we change the polling site locations? Because in historically Black communities, depending on where growth has taken place, those historical sites where Black folks voted at in those precincts could be shifted the most. And so how do we do our best to not, how does the state do its best to use as little resources as possible to educate people? There's also not only a mechanism against voters in this state, but the supervisor of elections who can no longer receive outside funds to help educate people. They have to solely rely on using the state's budget to educate Floridians. And so if you are limited to a small budget in a 67 county state, your impact isn't going to be that great. And then if you're a third party organization like mine, you are now going to have to tell voters that they may or may not be able to get their voter registration ballot in on time, which weakens our credibility and our relationships in the community. And so they have found a way to identify at least 3 groups that they can target to dwindle down the vote as much as they possibly can ahead of this governor's midterm election this fall, and then ahead of the 2024 election, that's presidential election that's also coming to the state.
And all those things are so important because let's go back to Governor Ron DeSantis. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but basically he interrupted the legislature's redistricting work with his own plan. And it does away really with the district currently held by Black Democratic Congressman Al Lawson. It's like, what's he going to do now? So talk about that issue and where does it stand right now?
So he submitted his own map, you're correct, to the legislature, and then he took it a step further. He didn't want to wait on them to make the decision that they are constitutionally required to do. Instead, he went directly to the Supreme Court, using them as almost his personal legal counsel, as opposed to referring to the legal counsel that we already pay for in this state and asking them to make a judgment. On last week, they ruled and said that they will not make a judgment on his map and that he has to go through the proper channels of the state. And as a result, this morning, the body of redistricting subcommittee members met and said that they will follow the lead of the Supreme Court and they will continue their process of drawing a map. That map, however, does not exclude Congressman Al Lawson. It does keep that district intact. It does keep it with a majority representation, but it does have a few more committee stops before it makes it to the floor for a general vote. So anything is possible, and our governor has ultimately said he will continue to interfere in the process until he sees a map that he approves, but he also has veto power if he sees a map that he doesn't like.
Wow, well, let's hope Lawson can stay in power. But I want to also talk about DeSantis and how he proposed the creation of the Office of Election Crimes and Securities. That sounds like a problem waiting to happen. Are you concerned at all about that?
I'm completely concerned about including police in an elections process. That is not something that I think our state is prepared or equipped to do. We have state attorneys across the state of Florida who are not equipped and are currently understaffed and battling so many other issues that adding elections as almost a criminal act to their docket is just unrealistic. But to have police officers come to your home and investigate whether or not you're eligible to vote or question the legitimacy of your ballot terrifies me. And I know that my community is going to be the first at risk and the first to be accused once this police force is in place. The other thing that is of concern is the amount of money, millions of dollars that have been dedicated to making sure that this police force task is created, despite the fact that we have seen a major shortage in teachers across the state. We are giving bonuses instead to police officers to join our state and do the work of the governor. And so I'm deeply concerned about what the results are of this task force.
All right, it sounds just like another way to get those Jim Crow intimidation tactics out there. So hopefully we can get rid of it. All right, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.